MTC. Unit 19, 1. No analysis. Test scores are not a measure of self-worth, however, we often associate our sense of worthiness with our performance on an exam. Thoughts such as if I don't pass this test, I'm a failure are mental traps not rooted in truth. Failing a test is failing a test, nothing more. It is in no way descriptive of your value as a person. Believing that test performance is a reflection of your virtue places unreasonable pressure on your performance. Not passing the certification test only means that your certification status has been delayed. Maintaining a positive attitude is therefore important. If you have studied hard, reaffirm this mentally and believe that you will do well. If, on the other hand, you did not study as hard as you should have or wanted to, accept that is beyond your control for now and attend to the task of doing the best you can. If things do not go well this time, you know what needs to be done in preparation for the next exam. Talk to yourself in positive terms. Avoid rationalizing past or future test performance by placing the blame on secondary variables. Thoughts such as, I didn't have enough time, or I should have, worsen the stress of test taking. Take control by affirming your value, self-worth, and dedication to meeting the test challenge head-on. Repeat to yourself I can and I will pass this exam. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Unit 19, 1. No 0102. In this day and age, it is difficult to imagine our lives without email. But how often do we consider the environmental impact of these virtual messages? At first glance, digital messages appear to save resources. Unlike traditional letters, no paper or stamps are needed, nothing has to be packaged or transported. Many of us tend to assume that using email requires little more than the electricity used to power our computers. It's easy to overlook the invisible energy usage involved in running the network, particularly when it comes to sending and storing data. Every single email in every single inbox in the world is stored on a server. The incredible quantity of data requires huge server farms, gigantic centers with millions of computers which store and transmit information. These servers consume massive amounts of energy, 24 hours a day, and require countless liters of water, or air conditioning systems, for cooling. 4. The more messages we send, receive, and store, the more servers are needed, which means more energy consumed, and more carbon emissions. Clearly, sending and receiving electronic messages in an environmentally conscious manner is by no means enough to stop climate change. But with a few careful, mindful changes, unnecessary CO2 emissions can easily be avoided. CO2. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Unit 19, 1. No 0304. Paralysis by analysis is a state of overthinking and analyzing a particular problem, but you still end up not making a decision. One famous ancient fable of the fox and the cat explains this situation of paralysis by analysis in the simplest way. In the story, the fox and the cat discuss how many ways they have to escape their hunters. Cat quickly climbs a tree. Fox, on the other hand, begins to analyze all the ways to escape that he knows. But unable to decide which one would be the best, he fails to act and gets caught by the dogs. This story perfectly illustrates the analysis paralysis phenomenon. The inability to act or decide due to overthinking about available alternatives. People experience that although they start with a good intention to find a solution to a problem, they often analyze indefinitely about various factors that might lead to wrong decisions. They don't feel satisfied with the available information and think they still need more data to perfect their decision. Most often this situation of paralysis by analysis arises when somebody is afraid of making an erroneous decision that can lead to potential catastrophic consequences. It might impact their careers or their organization's productivity. So that's why people are generally overcautious in making decisions that involve huge stakes. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Unit 19, 1, No 0506. Evolutionary biologists believe sociability drove the evolution of our complex brains. Fossil evidence shows that as far back as 130,000 years ago, it was not unusual for Homo sapiens to travel more than 150 miles to trade, share food and, no doubt, gossip. 13150. Unlike the Neanderthals, their social groups extended far beyond their own families. Remembering all those connections, who was related to whom, and where they lived required considerable processing power. It also required wayfinding savvy. Imagine trying to maintain a social network across tens or hundreds of square miles of Paleolithic wilderness. You couldn't send a text message to your friends to find out where they were. You had to go out and visit them, remember where you last saw them, or imagine where they might have gone. To do this, you needed navigation skills, spatial awareness, a sense of direction, the ability to store maps of the landscape in your mind, and the motivation to travel around. Canadian anthropologist Arian Burke believes that our ancestors developed all these attributes while trying to keep in touch with their neighbors. Arian Burke. Eventually, our brains became primed for wayfinding. Meanwhile, the Neanderthals, who didn't travel as far, never fostered a spatial skill set, despite being sophisticated hunters, well adapted to the cold and able to see in the dark. They went extinct. In the prehistoric Badlands, nothing was more useful than a circle of friends. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Unit 19, 1, No 0708. U.S. commercial aviation has long had an extremely effective system for encouraging pilots to submit reports of errors. The program has resulted in numerous improvements to aviation safety. It wasn't easy to establish. Pilots had severe self-induced social pressures against admitting to errors. Moreover, to whom would they report them? Certainly not to their employers. Not even to the Federal Aviation Authority, FAA, for then they would probably be punished. FAA. The solution was to let the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, set up a voluntary accident reporting system whereby pilots could submit semi-anonymous reports of errors they had made or observed in others. NASA. Once NASA personnel had acquired the necessary information, they would detach the contact information from the report and mail it back to the pilot. NASA. This meant that NASA no longer knew who had reported the error, which made it impossible for the airline companies or the FAA, which enforced penalties against errors, to find out who had submitted the report. NASA, FAT. If the FAA had independently noticed the error and tried to invoke a civil penalty or certificate suspension, the receipt of self-report automatically exempted the pilot from punishment. FAT. When a sufficient number of similar errors had been collected, NASA would analyze them and issue reports and recommendations to the airlines and to the FAA. NASA FAT. These reports also helped the pilots realize that their error reports were valuable tools for increasing safety. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Unit 19, 1, No 0910. An organization imported new machinery with the capacity to produce quality products at a lesser price. A manager was responsible for large quantities in a relatively short span of time. He started with the full utilization of the new machinery. He operated it 24/7 at maximum capacity. 247. He paid the least attention to downtime, recovery breaks, or the general maintenance of the machinery. As the machinery was new, it continued to produce results and, therefore, the organization's profitability soared and the manager was appreciated for his performance. Now after some time, this manager was promoted and transferred to a different location. A new manager came in his place to be in charge of running the manufacturing location. But this manager realized that with heavy utilization and without any downtime for maintenance, a lot of the parts of the machinery were significantly worn and needed to be replaced or repaired. The new manager had to put significant time and effort into repair and maintenance of the machines, which resulted in lower production and thus a loss of profits. The earlier manager had only taken care of the goal of production and ignored the machinery, although he had short-term good results. But ultimately not giving attention to recovery and maintenance resulted in long-term negative consequences. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Unit 19, 1, No 11-12. Animal studies have dealt with the distances creatures may keep between themselves and members of other species. These distances determine the functioning of the so-called flight or fight mechanism. As an animal senses what it considers to be a predator approaching within its flight distance, it will quite simply run away. The distance at which this happens is amazingly consistent, and Heidegger, a Swiss biologist, claimed to have measured it remarkably precisely for some of the species that he studied. Heidegger. Naturally, it varies from species to species, and usually the larger the animal the longer its flight distance. I have had to use a long focus lens to take photographs of giraffes, which have very large flight distances. By contrast, I have several times nearly stepped on a squirrel in my garden before it drew attention to itself by suddenly escaping. We can only assume that this variation in distance matches the animal's own assessment of its ability to accelerate and run. The fight distance is always smaller than the flight distance. If a perceived predator approaches within the flight distance but the animal is trapped by obstacles or other predators and cannot flee, it must stand its ground. Eventually, however, attack becomes the best form of defense, and so the trapped animal will turn and fight. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Unit 19, 1, No 13-14. We're creatures who live and die by the energy stores we've built up in our bodies. Navigating the world is a difficult job that requires moving around and using a lot of brain power and energy-expensive endeavor. When we make correct predictions, that saves energy. When you know that edible bugs can be found beneath certain types of rocks, it saves turning over all the rocks. The better we predict, the less energy it costs us. Repetition makes us more confident in our forecasts and more efficient in our actions. So there's something appealing about predictability. But if our brains are going to all this effort to make the world predictable, that begs the question. If we love predictability so much, why don't we, for example, just replace our televisions with machines that emit a rhythmic beep 24 hours a day, predictably? 2-4? The answer is that there's a problem with a lack of surprise. The better we understand something, the less effort we put into thinking about it. Familiarity increases indifference. Repetition suppression sets in and our attention diminishes. This is why no matter how much you enjoyed watching the World Series, you aren't going to be satisfied watching that same game over and over. Although predictability is reassuring, the brain strives to incorporate new facts into its model of the world. It always seeks novelty. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Unit 19, 1, No 15-16. It is not uncommon to hear talk about how lucky we are to live in this age of scientific and medical advancement where antibiotics and vaccinations keep us living longer, while our poor ancient ancestors were lucky to live past the age of 35. 3-5. Well, this is not quite true. At best, it oversimplifies a complex issue, and at worst, it is an obvious misrepresentation of statistics. Did ancient humans really just drop dead as they were entering their prime, or did some live long enough to see a wrinkle on their face? It would appear that as time went on, conditions improved and so did the length of people's lives. But it is not so simple. What is commonly known as average life expectancy is technically life expectancy at birth. But life expectancy at birth is an unhelpful statistic if the goal is to compare the health and longevity of adults. That is because a major determinant of life expectancy at birth is the child mortality rate which, in our ancient past, was extremely high, and this skews the life expectancy rate dramatically downward. If we look again at the estimated maximum life expectancy for prehistoric humans, which is 35 years, we can see that this does not mean that the average person living at this time died at the age of 35. 35. Rather, it means that for every child that died in infancy, another person might have lived to be 70. 70. The life expectancy statistic is, therefore, a deeply flawed way to think about the quality of life of our ancient ancestors. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Unit 19, 1, No 1718. One cannot take for granted that the findings of any given study will have validity. Consider a situation where an investigator is studying deviant behavior. In particular, she is investigating the extent to which cheating by college students occurs on exams. Reasoning that it is more difficult for people monitoring an exam to keep students under surveillance in large classes than in smaller ones, she hypothesizes that a higher rate of cheating will occur on exams in large classes than in small. To test this hypothesis, she collects data on cheating in both large classes and small ones and then analyzes the data. Her results show that more cheating per student occurs in the larger classes. Thus, the data apparently support the investigator's research hypothesis. A few days later, however, a colleague points out that all the large classes in her study used multiple-choice exams, whereas all the small classes used short answer and essay exams. The investigator immediately realizes that an extraneous variable, exam format, is interfering with the independent variable, class size, and may be operating as a cause in her data. The apparent support for her research hypothesis may be nothing more than an artifact. Perhaps the true effect is that more cheating occurs on multiple-choice exams than on essay exams, regardless of class size. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Unit 19, 1, No 1920. Unlike coins and dice, humans have memories and do care about wins and losses. Still, the probability of a hit in baseball does not increase just because a player has not had one lately. 4 outs in a row may have been bad luck, line drives hit straight into fielders' gloves. This bad luck does not ensure good luck the next time at bat. If it is not bad luck, then a physical problem may be causing the player to do poorly. Either way, a baseball player who had 4 outs in a row is not due for a hit, nor is a player who made 4 hits in a row due for an out. If anything, a player with 4 hits in a row is probably a better batter than the player who made 4 outs in a row. Likewise, missed field goals need not be balanced by successes. A poor performance may simply suggest that the kicker is not very good. Being rejected for jobs does not make a job offer more likely. If anything, the evidence is mounting that this person is not qualified or interviews poorly. Not having a fire does not increase the chances of a fire. It may just be the mark of a prudent homeowner who does not put paper or cloth near a stove, put metal in the microwave, leave home with the stove on, or fall asleep smoking cigarettes. Every safe airplane trip does not increase the chances that the next trip will be a crash. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Unit 19, 1, No 2122. While complex, blockchains exhibit a set of core characteristics, which flow from the technology's reliance on a peer-to-peer network, public-private key cryptography, and consensus mechanisms. Blockchains are disintermediated and transnational. They are resilient and resistant to change, and enable people to store non-repudiable data, pseudonymously, in a transparent manner. Most if not all blockchain-based networks feature market-based or game-theoretical mechanisms for reaching consensus, which can be used to coordinate people or machines. These characteristics, when combined, enable the deployment of autonomous software and explain why blockchains serve as a powerful new tool to facilitate economic and social activity that otherwise would be difficult to achieve. At the same time, these characteristics represent the technology's greatest limitations. The disintermediated and transnational nature of blockchains makes the technology difficult to govern and makes it difficult to implement changes to a blockchain's underlying software protocol. Because blockchains are pseudonymous and have a tamper-resistant data structure supported by decentralized consensus mechanisms, they can be used to coordinate socially unacceptable or criminal conduct, including conduct facilitated by autonomous software programs. Moreover, because blockchains are transparent and traceable, they are prone to being co-opted by governments or corporations, transforming the technology into a powerful tool for surveillance and control. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Unit 19, 1, No 2324. In 2000, James Kuklinski of the University of Illinois led an influential experiment in which more than 1,000 Illinois residents were asked questions about welfare. 2000, Illinois. James Kuklinski 1,000 Illinois. More than half indicated that they were confident that their answers were correct, but in fact, only 3% of the people got more than half of the questions right. 3. Perhaps more disturbingly, the ones who were the most confident they were right were generally the ones who knew the least about the topic. Kuklinski calls this sort of response the "I know I'm right" syndrome. Kuklinski. It implies not only that most people will resist correcting their factual beliefs, he wrote, but also that the very people who most need to correct them will be least likely to do so. How can we have things so wrong and be so sure that we're right? Part of the answer lies in the way our brains are wired. Generally, people tend to seek consistency. There is a substantial body of psychological research showing that people tend to interpret information with an eye toward reinforcing their pre-existing views. If we believe something about the world, we are more likely to passively accept as truth any information that confirms our beliefs, and actively dismiss information that doesn't. This is known as motivated reasoning. Whether or not the consistent information is accurate, we might accept it as fact, as confirmation of our beliefs. This makes us more confident in said beliefs, and even less likely to entertain facts that contradict them.